When a cleaning lady blew bubbles to calm a child's nervous breakdown, no one expected the outcome. Hidden in the crowd, a powerful CEO witnessed it all, and his next move stunned the entire company. Before we begin, share where you're watching in the comments. And when the story is over, don't forget to rate it from 0 to 10. Enjoy. I had walked through the lobby of my corporation 1,000 times, and never once had I truly stopped to notice the people who worked there. The guards, the receptionists, the cleaning staff, all of them moved like background actors in a play I thought belonged only to me. That morning was no different, until the sudden sound of a boy's voice cut through the polished silence like broken glass. It was my son, Alex. His scream echoed against marble and steel, raw and terrifying. He had collapsed near the fountain, fists pounding the floor, his body shaking in a storm of grief I could neither understand nor control. People froze. Executives in tailored suits stared, whispering. Some tried to step closer, then pulled back, helpless. Therapists, nannies, teachers, none of them had been able to reach him before, and in that moment, I knew we were about to fail him again. I wanted to run to him, to gather him in my arms, but I had learned that my presence sometimes made things worse. My power could not command peace into my child's heart. And so I stood, trapped in the cruelest position a father could face, watching my son break, knowing my wealth meant nothing against his pain. Then she appeared. A young woman in a cleaner's uniform, her hair tied back loosely, her hands still red from work. Emma Reeves. She moved quietly, without hesitation, as though she had been waiting for this moment all her life. People tried to stop her, security lifted a hand, a secretary whispered, "Miss, step back." But she ignored them. Instead, she crouched down in front of Alex and, from the pocket of her apron, pulled out something so absurd, so unexpected, that the entire lobby seemed to hold its breath. Soap bubbles. She dipped a small wand into the liquid, raised it gently, and blew. Dozens of fragile, shimmering spheres floated into the air, catching the light of the glass ceiling. Alex's cries faltered. His fists slowed. His wide, tear-streaked eyes fixed on the bubbles as though they carried some secret message meant only for him. He reached out, hesitantly at first, then with growing urgency, trying to catch one before it burst. His sobs softened into shaky laughter, and within seconds the boy who had been unreachable for months was chasing bubbles across the floor, his storm replaced by sunlight. I stood rooted in place, unable to believe what I was seeing. The therapists I had paid fortunes to could not do this. The teachers with their endless degrees could not do this. Yet here was a young woman, a cleaner, calming my son with nothing but soap and breath. Around us, the onlookers whispered louder now, shocked not by Alex's breakdown but by the miracle unfolding in front of them. Emma did not look at me. She did not ask for thanks. She simply kept blowing bubbles until my son's breathing steadied and his shoulders relaxed. I felt something inside me shift, a mixture of relief, awe, and a strange vulnerability I had not allowed myself to feel in years. For the first time in what felt like forever, Alex looked happy. And I, David Gray, the man who thought he could control every outcome with money, power, and precision, found myself staring at a woman I did not know, wondering how it was possible that she had just saved my son in a way I never could. And even as the bubbles faded into nothing, I knew that this moment was only the beginning. When the last of the bubbles had vanished into the stillness of the lobby and the crowd began to disperse with the hushed murmurs of people who had witnessed something they could not explain, I knew I could not let Emma slip back into the anonymity of her work. I followed her as she tried to retreat toward the service hallway, her shoulders stiff with the awkward awareness that she had broken every unspoken rule of hierarchy in my company by kneeling in the middle of the marble floor and calming my son with a toy. I stopped her with a voice I rarely used outside the boardroom, a voice that did not ask but commanded, though in that moment it carried not power but desperation. "Miss Reeves, come with me." She froze, turned, and for the first time our eyes met. I saw suspicion, fear, and something else, an instinctive protectiveness that told me she had not acted for reward but because she could not have walked past a child in pain. The elevator ride to my office was suffocating. She kept her gaze lowered, clutching the small bottle of bubbles in her pocket like a talisman, while I stood beside her, torn between gratitude and bewilderment. The mirrored walls reflected us both, me in my tailored suit, the emblem of wealth and authority, her in a simple uniform that smelled faintly of detergent. We looked like people from different worlds forced into the same confined space, and I realized with an ache that I had never felt so unequal to someone before. By the time the doors opened onto the top floor, silence had grown so heavy between us that I could no longer endure it. "You did something today that no one else could," I said quietly. "Do you understand that?" In my office, with the skyline sprawling in cold brilliance behind me, she finally spoke. Her voice was steady but carried the sharp edge of someone used to being underestimated. "I didn't do anything special, Mr. Gray. I just gave him something to focus on. Children like bubbles. That's all." I leaned across the desk, searching her face for the calculation or arrogance that people usually revealed in front of me, but I saw none. She was painfully sincere. "Do you know how many specialists I have hired? How many programs I have forced my son through? And yet he sits in silence, trapped in walls I cannot break. Then you come, a stranger with nothing but soap, and suddenly he laughs. Don't tell me that is nothing." She shook her head, her expression tense. "I'm not a therapist. I don't have training. I'm just a cleaner, and I should go back before someone notices I've been pulled away." I felt something raw rise in me, a mixture of frustration and pleading, emotions I had long buried beneath the armor of control. "I am not asking you to be a therapist. I am asking you to be what no one else has managed to be, a friend to my son. Come to the penthouse a few evenings a week. No uniforms, no job titles, just Emma. Spend time with him. Play if you must. Whatever you did today, do it again." Her lips parted in disbelief, and for a long moment she said nothing. Then, carefully, she answered, "You don't know me. You don't know what people will say if they see me walking into your home. And more than that, you don't know if your son even wants me there. Children are unpredictable. What worked today might not work tomorrow." Her honesty stung, but I refused to retreat. I know only this: I saw him smile, and I would burn every bridge I own to see it again. Let them talk, let them speculate, I don't care. What matters is Alex. The silence that followed was thick, stretching like a test of wills. Finally, she exhaled, her shoulders sagging as though she had just surrendered to a battle she never intended to fight. "If I agree, it will be on my terms. I am not his nanny. I won't replace professionals. I'll just be there. Nothing more." I nodded slowly, feeling an unfamiliar relief spread through me. "On your terms, then. Just don't disappear." When she stood to leave, I noticed her hand trembling slightly as it brushed against the edge of the desk. I wanted to ask what made her afraid, but I held back. She had agreed, and that was all that mattered for now. Yet as the elevator closed behind her, a quiet unease settled in my chest, a warning that what had begun as a simple request would soon turn into something far more complicated. When I opened the door of my penthouse the following evening, the silence that usually greeted me felt different. It wasn't the hollow emptiness I had grown accustomed to over the years, it was charged with anticipation, restless and uncertain. Alex sat on the couch, his small body hunched forward, fingers nervously twisting the edge of his sleeve. His eyes, wide and cautious, darted toward me and then quickly away. He had been told someone new was coming, and I could see the storm of doubt already rising inside him. For months, every stranger had been a disappointment, every professional a reminder of how isolated he was. I had prepared myself for rejection, but as I watched him stare at the door, I realized I had not prepared for the possibility of hope. The knock was soft, almost hesitant. When I opened it, Emma stood there with the same modest uniform she wore at the office replaced by simple jeans and a sweater. She looked nothing like the employees who came and went through my company's doors. She looked disarmingly ordinary, which somehow made her presence in my world of glass and steel even more striking. She held no toys, no books, nothing but that same small bottle of bubbles tucked into her pocket. "Thank you for coming," I said quietly, though my voice carried more weight than gratitude. She nodded, stepping inside, her eyes sweeping across the vast room with its polished marble floors, towering windows, and art chosen more for prestige than warmth. She looked out of place, and yet, when her gaze landed on Alex, something softened in her expression. Alex shifted uneasily, clutching the cushion as if it were a shield. I expected him to retreat, perhaps even lash out the way he often did when confronted with unfamiliar faces. But Emma crouched a few feet away, lowering herself to his level, her voice calm and without demand. "Hi, Alex," she said gently. "Remember me? From the lobby?" He didn't answer. He stared, suspicious but curious, his small chest rising and falling too quickly. I wanted to intervene, to encourage him, but something in her posture told me to stay silent. She reached into her pocket, pulled out the bubble wand, and blew softly. A single sphere drifted into the air, fragile and glowing under the chandelier's light. Alex's eyes followed it instinctively. The moment was delicate, like watching a bridge being built one plank at a time. Emma didn't push, didn't overwhelm him with questions. Instead, she let the bubbles speak for her. One became two, then a dozen, filling the air with shimmering circles that floated between them. Alex's hand lifted, hesitant at first, then more eagerly, reaching out to catch one. When it burst against his palm, he giggled, an unguarded, pure sound I had not heard in far too long. My throat tightened, and I had to turn slightly toward the window to hide the emotion that rose too quickly in me. Soon, the game changed. Alex began to invent rules, pointing and shouting when he wanted her to blow higher, laughing when the bubbles danced near the ceiling. Emma followed his lead effortlessly, her own laughter mingling with his in a way that filled the cold expanse of my penthouse with a warmth I had almost forgotten existed. I stood apart, my hands gripping the back of a chair, watching in disbelief. My son, the boy who had withdrawn into silence, was alive in front of me, his voice strong, his eyes alight with joy. And the reason was not me, not the specialists, not the empire I had built, but the young woman now sitting cross-legged on the floor, laughing as if this moment belonged to her as much as to him. As the evening stretched on, the games became sillier. They built towers out of cushions, crawled through imaginary caves, and invented nonsense words that made Alex shriek with laughter. Every sound was like a miracle, each smile a gift I had once feared I would never see again. When Emma finally stood to leave, Alex clung to her sleeve, whispering something I couldn't hear. She bent down, listened carefully, and smiled before gently reassuring him that she would be back. Only then did he release her. I escorted her to the door, my voice low so Alex wouldn't hear. "I don't know what you've done," I said, struggling to keep control of the gratitude surging through me. "But I've never seen him like this." Emma shook her head, her tone firm yet kind. "You've seen him like this before, Mr. Gray. You just forgot. He's still a child. He just needed someone to remind him." Her words struck me harder than I expected, a reminder that all my wealth had blinded me to the simplest truth: my son didn't need perfection, he needed presence. When she left, the apartment felt strangely fuller, as if her laughter and Alex's had seeped into the walls. That night, as I stood by my son's door and listened to the steady rhythm of his breathing, I knew something irreversible had begun. Emma Reeves had stepped into our lives not as a guest, not as an employee, but as a force I could no longer ignore. It didn't take long for whispers to reach the circles that surrounded me. My world was built on glass towers and boardrooms, where every choice was examined, interpreted, and judged, and Emma's presence in my home quickly became the subject of speculation. At first, I ignored it. What did it matter what anyone thought, when for the first time in years Alex laughed before bed and woke without the shadows in his eyes? But power is a fragile illusion, and in my world perception is currency. It was only a matter of time before someone tried to collect. That someone was Catherine Hale, my godmother, though I had long since stopped thinking of her in such tender terms. She was an empress of the old guard, a woman whose influence reached from political offices to charity galas, and who had once guided me with a hand so firm it left no room for doubt. She had been a second mother after my own past, but her love was conditional, measured in appearances, alliances, and victories. When she arrived at my penthouse unannounced one evening, her heels clicking sharply against the marble floor, I knew a storm had arrived. Alex was in the living room, his laughter spilling through the halls as Emma helped him balance blocks into a crooked castle. Catherine's eyes narrowed at the sight the moment she stepped in. Her voice was low, dripping with disdain. "David, what is this?" She gestured toward Emma without even acknowledging her name, as though she were an intruder caught trespassing. I tried to answer calmly, though my jaw was tight. "This is Emma Reeves. She's been spending time with Alex. She's helped him in ways no one else has managed." Catherine's gaze sharpened, her expression carved from stone. "A cleaner," she said, the word like a knife meant to cut Emma down where she stood. "You've invited a janitor into your home and placed her beside your son. Do you not realize how this looks? To the board? To society? To the people who invest in everything you do?" Emma froze, her hands trembling just slightly as she steadied the tower of blocks for Alex. She didn't defend herself, didn't argue. She only kept her focus on the boy, her quiet presence louder than any protest. But Catherine pressed on, relentless. Do not mistake her smile for sincerity. Women like her know very well what they're doing. They find a door into a powerful house, they charm their way into the hearts of children, and before you know it, they are demanding a place at the table. You're blinded because she makes Alex laugh. But laughter is cheap, David. It is loyalty that matters. Her words stung because they echoed the fear I hadn't dared to name. Was Emma truly here for Alex, or had I simply been desperate enough to believe in anyone who offered him peace? Yet when I looked at my son, his face lit with joy as he placed the final block on his castle, I knew Catherine's suspicion was poison. This was real. Alex's laughter wasn't cheap, it was priceless, and it had been gone for far too long. I turned to Catherine, my voice low, controlled, but shaking with restrained anger. Emma is not here for me, or for you, or for anyone else. She is here for Alex. And if you cannot see that, then perhaps you should ask yourself why. Catherine's lips pressed into a thin line. She leaned closer, her whisper sharp enough to cut. I have protected you since you were a boy. Don't throw everything away for the illusion of kindness. You think she wants nothing. Everyone wants something. She pulled her coat tighter and swept toward the door, leaving the scent of expensive perfume and disapproval behind her. When the door closed, silence filled the room, broken only by the sound of Alex cheering as his tower collapsed into a pile of blocks. Emma looked at me, her eyes unreadable, and for a moment I feared she might walk out, unable to endure the humiliation. But instead, she knelt beside Alex, laughing with him, pretending nothing had happened. I watched her, torn between gratitude and guilt, realizing that my world, the one I had built with steel and money, was already testing her with its cruelty. I told myself it was gratitude, nothing more, when I asked Emma to join me for dinner. After Catherine's venomous visit, I needed her to know that her place in our lives was not dictated by the whispers of society. Yet when I watched her step hesitantly into the restaurant that evening, her simple dress modest but graceful, her hair pulled back in a way that made her look younger and yet more assured, I realized gratitude was only the surface of what pulled me toward her. We sat at a quiet table in the corner, away from the curious eyes that always seemed to follow me. The air was thick with the aroma of roasted garlic and wine, the soft hum of music weaving between conversations. At first, Emma fidgeted, her gaze fixed on the polished cutlery as though she did not belong among crystal glasses and linen napkins. I wanted to tell her she belonged more than anyone else in the room, but the words felt too heavy, too dangerous. Instead, I began with the safe ground. I wanted to thank you, I said, my voice lower than usual. You've given Alex something I thought was lost forever. And you've given me something too, hope. Her eyes lifted, uncertain but touched. I didn't do much, she replied. I just listened to him. Children understand when someone is really there. They feel it. Maybe he doesn't get that often enough. Her words cut deeper than she intended. I lowered my gaze, ashamed of the truth in them. For years I had been present in body but absent in spirit, drowning in meetings, contracts, and headlines while my son built walls I could not climb. I admitted it, though my voice trembled. You're right. I failed him. I thought I was protecting him by giving him everything money could buy, but I gave him nothing that mattered. For a moment, she was silent, studying me as though seeing past the suit, past the reputation, past the armor I had carried for years. Then, gently, she said, "You're too hard on yourself. You love him. That's clear. But love needs time, not just intentions." Her honesty disarmed me, because she didn't flatter, didn't excuse, didn't try to tell me what I wanted to hear. She told me the truth. And I found myself craving more of it. The conversation drifted from Alex to fragments of our pasts. I told her about my late wife, how grief had left me hollow, how business had become my only escape. She told me about her childhood, growing up in a neighborhood where no one expected much from her, where survival was a greater victory than ambition. She spoke of her mother's illness, of nights spent cleaning instead of studying, of the quiet resignation that had brought her into my company's halls with a mop in her hands. Yet even in those stories of hardship, there was no bitterness, only resilience, a quiet strength that humbled me. Laughter came unexpectedly. She teased me about my polished shoes, about the way I ordered wine as though reciting a business proposal. I teased her about the soap bubbles, asking if she carried them everywhere like a secret weapon. She grinned, admitting she did, and for the first time in years I felt the weight on my chest ease. The walls between us cracked, not with grand gestures but with simple words, with the kind of honesty I hadn't known how to share in a long time. When dessert arrived, a quiet settled over the table. I found myself staring at her hands, roughened from work yet graceful as they held the fork. I thought about how those hands had held Alex's trust more gently than anyone else ever had, and the thought struck me harder than I expected. She looked up, catching my gaze, and for a breathless moment neither of us looked away. Something unspoken hung in the air, fragile, dangerous, undeniable. I broke the silence first, my voice hoarse. I never expected to feel this again. She didn't ask what I meant. She only lowered her eyes, her cheeks tinged with color, and whispered, "Neither did I." That night, when I walked her to the car, the city lights reflected in her eyes, I felt an urge so strong it frightened me, the urge to reach for her hand, to close the distance. But I didn't. I couldn't. Not yet. The world around us was already sharpening its knives, and I knew the danger of crossing that invisible line. Still, as she drove away, I stood on the curb with my heart beating faster than it had in years, knowing that the line had already been crossed in silence. I had almost convinced myself that our dinner had been private, that the world had not noticed the rare evening when I allowed myself to smile at something other than profit. But the world I lived in had no patience for secrets. By the time the sun rose the next morning, the headlines had already spread like fire. The cleaner in the penthouse. From mob to mansion, who is David Gray's new companion? My name was everywhere, my company's logo splashed beside grainy photos of Emma walking into the building, holding Alex's hand, her face caught in the merciless flash of paparazzi who had trailed her without her even knowing. They didn't care about truth, they cared about spectacle. And spectacle was exactly what they had found. I sat at the head of my dining table, the papers sprawled before me, my phone buzzing with calls I refused to answer. Alex played quietly nearby, oblivious, stacking toy cars into a fragile pyramid. I wished I could shield him from everything beyond these walls, but children always sense storms before they break. His small eyes flicked toward me, anxious, as if he knew I was about to shatter again. Emma wasn't there yet, but her absence made the air heavier. I imagined her waking to the same headlines, reading words that tore her character apart, seeing strangers dissect her life with cruelty disguised as curiosity. By the time she arrived, her face was pale, her hands clutching her phone like a weapon she no longer knew how to use. She dropped it on the counter, the screen still glowing with messages. "Do you see what they're saying about me?" Her voice trembled, though she tried to hold it steady. "That I've been scheming to trap you, that I'm using Alex to climb into your world. They've dug up my address, my mother's illness, even debts I paid off years ago. They're painting me like some villain in a story I never asked to be part of." I stood, reaching for her, but she pulled back, her eyes sharp with fear. "This will destroy me, David. I can't fight people who don't even know my name but think they know my life. I thought I could handle whispers in your world, but this is fire." I tried to reason with her, to remind her that rumors burn fast and die just as quickly, but I knew I was lying. In my world, scandal doesn't die, it mutates, spreads, finds new ways to wound. She had stepped into my life to save my son, and now she was drowning in the consequences of being near me. I told her I would protect her, that I had lawyers who could silence the tabloids, publicists who could twist the narrative, but she shook her head violently. "That won't protect Alex. It won't protect me when strangers glare at me on the street. The more you fight, the more they'll dig. Don't you see? The only way to protect your son is for me to disappear." The word struck me harder than any accusation Catherine had thrown. "Disappear?" I repeated, my voice breaking. "Emma, he needs you. I need you." Her eyes glistened with unshed tears, but her resolve was terrifying. "He needed me once, and I gave him laughter. But if I stay, he'll lose more than he gains. Let me go before the damage is permanent." She turned then, moving toward the door, and for the first time since she had walked into our lives, I felt powerless in a way I had never known. My wealth, my reputation, my influence, all of it meant nothing in the face of a woman's decision to sacrifice herself for the sake of my child. I called her name, my voice desperate, but she didn't look back. The door closed, and the sound echoed through the penthouse like a verdict. Alex rushed to me, confusion in his eyes. "Where's Emma?" he whispered. I couldn't answer. My throat closed, and all I could do was kneel and hold him, as if my embrace could disguise the truth that the one person who had brought light back into our lives had just walked away into the shadows. That night, long after Alex had cried himself to sleep, I sat alone in the dark with the tabloids spread across the floor, each headline sharper than the last. "Cleaner or con artist? Gray air exposed to a stranger. From rags to riches, or just rags." I wanted to tear them apart, to burn every page, but I knew the damage was already done. And as I stared at Emma's face frozen in those stolen photographs, I understood the cost of loving someone in my world. It was never them who paid first, it was always me who dragged them into the fire. The morning after Emma walked out, the penthouse felt colder than ever. The city beyond my windows was alive with its usual noise, horns, sirens, the pulse of ambition, but inside, silence weighed like a stone. I sat at the breakfast table, untouched plates of food between Alex and me, trying to coax him into eating. He pushed the fork away, his lips pressed tight, his eyes refusing to meet mine. "I'm not hungry," he whispered, and it was more than stubbornness. It was grief, raw and unmasked. I tried to distract him with the toys he once loved, but he only stared at them as if they belonged to another child, one who no longer existed. When I reached to brush his hair back, he flinched, retreating into himself the way he used to before Emma arrived. My chest tightened with a pain I could not disguise. She had given him laughter, connection, light. Without her, he was collapsing again, and no matter how much I wanted to fill that void, I couldn't. For the rest of the day I cancelled meetings, ignored calls, turned my back on the empire that demanded my constant attention. I sat beside my son, trying to break through the wall that had risen in just one night. But every time I spoke, he turned away. When I asked what he wanted, he whispered one word, fragile and devastating, Emma. And with it came the sobs I could not soothe. By evening, I had exhausted every promise I knew how to make. My staff avoided me, their footsteps cautious, their eyes lowered. They had seen me negotiate with prime ministers, silence rivals with a single phrase, bend markets with a signature. But here, with my own son trembling in my arms, I was powerless. I had failed to keep the one person who could reach him. And as Alex fell asleep clutching the bubble bottle she had left behind, I made a decision that burned through me like fire. I could not let her go. Not because of my pride, not because of appearances, but because my family, my son and I, would not survive without her. The world could laugh, the board could sneer, the papers could crucify me, none of it mattered. Emma had become the center of our fragile hope, and I would find her, no matter what it cost. I began that night, searching through every file I had on employees, chasing every thread that might lead me to her. She had left no trace, as if she had been swallowed by the city. But she had spoken once, briefly, of the small town where she had grown up, of the children she used to help with homework in a community center that smelled of dust and old chalk. It was the only clue I had, and I clung to it as though it were a lifeline. For days I sent men, called contacts, pulled favors I had long promised never to use. I sat awake through the nights, Alex's fragile sleep beside me, studying maps and lists, imagining where she might have gone. At last, one of my assistants returned with a report. She had been seen in a modest town 2 hours away, working in a small school, helping children paint murals on cracked walls. When I saw the grainy photograph of her smiling at those children, her hair tied back, her hands streaked with color, I felt a surge of relief so violent it almost hurt. She hadn't disappeared into despair, she had found purpose. The next morning, I told Alex we were going on a trip. He clutched the drawing he had made the night before, 3 bubbles floating side by side, uneven but unmistakable. For Emma, he said simply. His voice trembled, but his eyes carried something I hadn't seen in days, hope. As the car carried us away from the skyline that had once defined me, I realized this journey wasn't about reclaiming control. It was about surrendering to something greater than wealth, greater than reputation. It was about saving the only bond that had ever truly mattered. The schoolyard looked nothing like the places I was used to. There were no polished floors, no shining glass walls, no carefully curated gardens trimmed by hired hands. The playground here was a patch of uneven ground where chalk drawings colored the cracked pavement and swings creaked against rusted chains. Yet the air was alive, children laughing, running, painting their futures in streaks of bright color on a peeling wall. And in the middle of them stood Emma. She was kneeling beside a boy who had splattered red paint across his shoes, her laughter soft, her hands guiding his brush back to the wall. Her sweater was dotted with stains, her hair pulled into a careless knot, and still she looked more radiant than anyone I had ever seen at the banquets and galas that defined my world. For a moment I hesitated, watching her from the edge of the yard, afraid that if I stepped closer I might shatter the fragile piece she had built here. But Alex didn't hesitate. The moment he saw her, he broke free from my hand and ran forward, his voice breaking with urgency. Emma! She turned, startled, and when her eyes landed on him, her entire expression changed. The brush slipped from her fingers, and she rose quickly, wiping her stained hands against her jeans as if to steady herself. Alex skidded to a stop in front of her, breathless, holding out the drawing he had carried the whole way, a page with 3 uneven bubbles drifting side by side. For you, he whispered. Her lips parted, and I saw her blink rapidly as if fighting tears. She crouched to his height, took the drawing with trembling fingers, and pressed it against her chest. 3 bubbles, she said softly. Like a family. Alex nodded, and before I could take another step, he threw his arms around her. She hugged him tightly, burying her face in his hair, and in that moment I knew no wall of scandal, no headline, no thread of power could sever what bound them together. I finally walked forward, my voice low, careful not to disturb the fragile reunion. I had to find you. She looked up at me, her eyes conflicted, relief warring with fear, affection tangled with doubt. You shouldn't have, she murmured. The longer I stay away, the safer it is for all of you. I shook my head, every word pulled from the deepest place of my resolve. No. Without you, there is no safety. Alex has crumbled since you left. And me. I've realized I don't care what the world thinks. I've built empires, Emma, but none of them matter if the price is losing the only person who gave us back our lives. She stood, still holding Alex's hand as though she needed his small strength to keep her steady. And what happens when your world tears us apart again? When the next scandal hits, when someone powerful decides I don't belong? Will you defend us then, or will you let them decide our worth? Her words cut like knives because they were not accusations but truths I had to face. I stepped closer, lowering my voice so only she could hear. Then let me prove it. Don't come back just for Alex, come back on the condition that we do more than survive. Help me create something bigger, something that will protect not just him, but children like him everywhere. Use my power, my resources, my name, take all of it and turn it into something that cannot be broken by whispers or headlines. She studied me, her eyes searching for weakness, for the false promises she had learned all her life to expect from men with too much power. But I held her gaze, steady and unflinching. After a long silence, she exhaled, her shoulders sagging as though surrendering to the truth she no longer wanted to fight. I'll come back, she said softly, but only if we build something for others, not just for ourselves. If I return, it won't be to hide in your penthouse. It will be to fight for every child who feels invisible, every child who needs more than money. Alex looked between us, his small hand tightening around hers, his voice urgent. Please say yes, Dad. Please. I reached out, covering their joined hands with mine. Then it's a promise, I whispered. We'll build it together. Emma's eyes shimmered with the faintest trace of a smile, fragile but real. And as the children around us shouted and played, the three of us stood in the middle of that cracked schoolyard, holding hands as though we were already a family. For the first time, I didn't feel like a man caught between two worlds. I felt like I was exactly where I was meant to be. The boardroom had always been my battlefield, a place where numbers and strategy defined victory and where my authority was never questioned. Yet on that day, as I stood before the directors with Emma seated quietly at the end of the long polished table, I felt a pressure unlike any I had ever known. Her presence was not one of power or prestige, she wore no tailored suit, no diamonds, carried no influence among shareholders. But she carried truth, and truth in a room like this was more dangerous than any rival company. The directors had been circling for weeks, whispering behind closed doors, questioning my judgment ever since Emma's name first hit the tabloids. Now they had gathered like vultures waiting for me to stumble. Mr. Langford, the oldest among them, cleared his throat with deliberate weight. David, he began, his voice thick with disapproval, we've tolerated scandal before. Affairs, rumors, even hostile negotiations, but what you're doing now jeopardizes everything. This relationship is reckless. A cleaner in your penthouse. Parading her in front of your son, in front of the press. You're dragging the company's reputation through the mud. I listened, my jaw tight, my hands clenched against the leather chair. Others joined in, talk of investors pulling out, of stock prices threatened by gossip, of legacy tarnished by a woman who, in their eyes, would never belong in our world. They spoke as though Emma were invisible, as though she were not sitting there, her chin lifted, her eyes steady despite the poison dripping from every word. I looked at her, and I saw not shame but defiance. She didn't flinch. She didn't beg for approval. She simply waited to see whether I would choose her or the empire. When their accusations finally subsided, I rose. My voice carried the kind of calm that frightened even seasoned men, because it wasn't anger, it was certainty. You're right about one thing, I said. This company is on the brink of change. But not because of scandal. Because I have realized that profit without conscience is no victory at all. For years, we've measured success in contracts and revenue, but I have seen something you have all ignored: children who suffer silently, who fall through the cracks of wealth and poverty alike. My son was one of them until Emma showed me that healing doesn't come from money, but from presence, patience, and courage. And I will not abandon that truth to soothe your pride. A murmur rippled through the room. Langford slammed his palm on the table. This is not about children, David. This is about control. About your reckless decision to place an outsider at the heart of our affairs. End this madness, dismiss her, and we will move forward. Refuse, and you risk everything: your position, your fortune, the company itself. I glanced at Emma. She shook her head almost imperceptibly, silently urging me not to sacrifice myself for her. But I could not step back, not when my son's laughter depended on her, not when I had promised her more than survival. I straightened, my voice ringing with conviction. Then I choose the risk. I will not dismiss her. In fact, I am placing her at the center of what comes next. Effective immediately, I am establishing a charitable foundation under the company's banner, an institute to support children who carry invisible wounds. And Emma will lead it. Gasps filled the boardroom. Some directors erupted in protest, others exchanged looks of horror. You can't, one shouted. You'll ruin us, another barked. But I did not waver. I can, I answered firmly. And I already have. The paperwork is filed, the funding secured from my personal accounts. This is not charity, it is legacy. If any of you cannot stand beside it, then step aside, because this is the future I am building. Silence fell, thick and trembling. I knew what I had just risked: votes against me, stockholders in revolt, the empire my family had built hanging by a thread. But when I looked at Emma, I saw her eyes glisten with something I had never seen before: faith. Not gratitude, not awe, but faith that I would stand even when the ground beneath us shook. The board adjourned in fury, threats hanging in the air. Yet when the room emptied and only Emma and I remained, she whispered, her voice breaking, "You just set your entire empire on fire." I took her hand, steady and certain. Then let it burn. What rises from the ashes will be ours. The day of the foundation's opening arrived like a storm I had been waiting for my entire life. The ballroom we had chosen was filled with faces I had once thought defined success: politicians, investors, journalists, men and women who shaped the world with their wealth and their words. Yet this time, they weren't gathered for another contract or acquisition. They were here because I had demanded it, because I had tied my name, my company, and my future to a cause that most of them didn't yet understand. Children filled the front rows, some shy, some restless, some clinging to the hands of the volunteers who had brought them. And standing just off stage, clutching a simple folder of notes, was Emma. She wore no designer gown, no jewels to impress the crowd. Her dress was modest, her hair tied back, her hands trembling only slightly as she looked out at the sea of skeptical faces. I wanted to step forward, to shield her, to tell her she didn't have to do this. But she turned to me before walking onto the stage, her voice a whisper meant only for me. "You asked me to lead. Let me." And then she walked into the light. Her speech began simply. She didn't speak in grand gestures or polished rhetoric. She spoke of children, of their silences, their fears, their small joys that could be rekindled with the simplest acts. She told the story of a boy who had once sat in a marble lobby, his screams echoing while the world turned away, until a stranger knelt and blew bubbles into the air. She spoke of how healing doesn't come from luxury, but from attention, from love, from presence. Her voice wavered at times, but every word rang true, piercing through the layers of cynicism in that room. I stood in the wings, watching faces shift, investors who had come to scoff now leaning forward, journalists lowering their pens to listen, even directors from my board struggling to mask the impact her words had on them. But nothing compared to what happened when Alex, who had been sitting in the front row clutching his drawing of 3 bubbles, suddenly stood up. His small voice carried through the microphone she had left on the podium. "Mom," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. The room fell silent. Emma froze, her eyes wide, her hands clutching the edge of the lectern. My chest tightened so violently I could hardly breathe. And then Alex repeated it, clearer this time, his face shining with the certainty of a child who had finally found the word he had been searching for. "Mom." The sound broke something inside me, something I hadn't realized I had been holding on to: fear, doubt, pride. The audience erupted in murmurs, cameras flashing, but none of it mattered. Emma knelt, arms open, and Alex ran into them. In that moment, nothing else existed but the truth: he had chosen her, not as a guest, not as a friend, but as family. I walked onto the stage then, my legs unsteady but my heart clear. The crowd turned, expecting another speech, another polished statement. Instead, I took Emma's hand in mine, lifted her from the floor, and spoke the words I had carried in my chest for too long. "You gave me back my son. You gave me back myself. And now, in front of the world, I want to give you what I should have given you long ago, my promise." I knelt, not caring about cameras, not caring about scandal, only about the woman whose strength had rebuilt our lives. From my pocket, I pulled the ring I had carried for weeks. "Emma Reeves, will you marry me?" For a moment she was silent, her eyes brimming with tears, her free hand pressed to her lips. The crowd leaned forward, the silence stretching like eternity. Then she nodded, her voice breaking with a single word. "Yes." The room erupted, applause, gasps, flashes of light, but none of it touched us. Alex squeezed between us, clutching both our hands, his face radiant. That night, as we stood together with the foundation's banner behind us and the future spread before us, I realized that the empire I had once guarded so fiercely was meaningless compared to the family I held in my arms. We had faced scandal, judgment, and loss, but we had overcome them not with wealth or power, but with truth, with persistence, with the fragile courage to choose each other again and again. The world would keep talking. There would be more battles, more whispers, more storms. But as Emma rested her head against my shoulder and Alex's small hand slipped into mine, I understood something I had never grasped in all my years of power: victory was not measured in numbers, but in moments like this. Moments when love speaks louder than fear. Moments when a boy calls a woman "Mom" for the first time, and a man kneels not to conquer, but to surrender. And for the first time in my life, I felt free.